It was a saunter this time. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so I'm Daniel Whittington, Chancellor at Wizard Academy and Whiskey Marketing School. This is because one of the comments was a guy or person, Big Cast, but it's B1GC4ST, Big Cast. It said, why don't you go into why rye is considered a winter drink? And I read that and I thought, I have never heard of rye being called a winter drink, but now that he said that, I think that makes sense to me. And then I couldn't figure out why I felt that way. Because I don't drink rye in the winter. I don't drink rye hardly ever. But there's some sort of intangible logic in my brain about, like, yeah, that jives. And so I sat down and actually thought about it and tried to figure it out. And so we're going to talk about that. I would argue I don't have a winter whiskey because, you know, whiskey nerds tend to just drink all the different things that they like. And I like mostly Scotch and Irish and American single malts. And so I sort of live there all times of year. And, but then again, as I was thinking about it, I realized, wait a minute though, I do have a summer preference. It rarely gets that cold in Texas, but I have a summer preference, and that is high-proof bourbon on the rocks. And my qualifier is that it's hot. This is why the Southerners who came from, you know, England and so on didn't drink hot tea. They drink iced tea. Why? Because it's so hot down here. And so I need a whiskey that I can put on the rocks, and it will stand up to water and a temperature change. And for me, that's high-proof bourbon, does that really well. And so if I could argue I have a summer whiskey, then it would make sense that maybe I had a winter whiskey. But for me, as soon as it cools down, that just opens the door to being a neat whiskey drinker. And so I'm basically just giving you a voice to what was in my head as I argued with myself for like 15, 20 minutes about whether or not there's such a thing as a winter whiskey. Because every time I was like, no, I don't think so, I would say, but it makes sense though. Why does it make sense? I would argue, and this was a total tangent, the human right brain is pattern recognition, and it will assign pattern and meaning to things that are just complete bullshit. But then as soon as you say it, you'll be like, yeah, that makes sense, right? And so we always do this in class, which is if I draw two shapes, here's one. Here's another. One of these shapes is called Tatakata, and one is called La Luna. Which one's called La Luna? And now I feel like I'm on Blue's Clues. We need some background voices going, the first one. Yes. For some reason, your brain accepts that this nice curvy has a soft phonetic, and this sharp, hard-edged has a plosive, hard phonetic. Tatakata, right? And plosive, that's T's not plosive, but has a hard phonetic. That makes sense. Now, is that logical? No. Those are made-up words, made-up shapes. But another part of your brain's like, yeah, that makes sense. You see what I mean? So this is what I'm struggling with when trying to answer the question. But first, let's talk about Penelope rye. And I grabbed this because every time I grab Penelope, I'm always like, oh, that's nice. This was one of their, they're in Bardstown, Kentucky, but I think this is still MGP. I feel like it is. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Regardless, it's 95.5, which is the classic MGP, 95% rye to 5% malted barley. But this is their toasted series where they took already aged rye that they had that was, I think, probably 4-ish years old, and then they moved it into new toasted oak barrels, American oak. And a toast profile just really opens up a lot of those like spicy vanillins and like the tannins that aren't hard, truly hard and astringent, but lend themselves to spice and peppery zest. This one is the toasted series heavy toast, which is basically just the layer right before it becomes char. That's what that is. This was, for those who are keeping the math, 5-year-old whiskey, batch 23-303, 50% alcohol, which is 100 proof, char 1, heavy toast. There's your nerd facts. On the nose. Yeah, so baking spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and then a dark toasted marshmallow, like where it's black on the outside but still gooey on the inside. Maybe even not liquid on the inside, where you try to like take it off and the shell comes off and it leaves a chunk of marshmallow on the stick. Then a little bit of like old antique wood, but mostly baked goods and vanillins. Ooh, that's drier than I thought it would be. It's sweeter than I thought it would be too. There's a really deep vanilla core on this one that then is just surrounded by this really astringent, like my mouth is salivating right now. It's so dry that it just went ching and turned on all of my, was it salivary glands? Is that the word? Is that the word? No, it's whatever, saliva. My mouth is watering, but it's like really getting in the corners of the jaw. I like some of the other ones better. The astringency on this one is kind of screwing with me. I'm gonna add a little water. A lot of water. That's not a lot. A couple dashes. Okay, I'm gonna let this sit and talk about, I'm gonna give you 3 ways that I could argue you could find a winter whiskey. So, 1, maybe the flavors in the whiskey remind you of flavors that you consume during the holidays. And if that's the case, then a whiskey that leans towards baked goods and pastries and vanilla and dryness, cinnamon, nutmeg, of course that's gonna remind you of Christmas or holidays, generic holidays, right? Of course, that makes sense. Option 2, smoke, right? In the winters when you start having fireplace fires and when you're outside you have campfires. And so I could argue that, you know, for me and for a lot of other people, smoky whiskeys feel right at home during the winter because they also harken back to the smoky things that happen during winter. And the heat of a cold winter, right? It warms you. And density, 3rd one, I would argue, density. When when it's cold outside, that's when you don't mind rich foods, rich soups, rich desserts. When it's really hot and you're sweating, that is not the greatest time to have hot soup and a heavy fudge and some dark pastry pound cake, right? Like you want cream and berries and fruits and light zesty things and easier things. But when you find whiskey, and in whiskey nerd category, where it's like big and heavy and rich and full, those, I think it would make sense for them to lean into cold weather, thus holiday winter spirits, and neat, instead of in a cocktail. So I think all of those things are true, and at that level, sure, absolutely, there can be a winter whiskey. However, I like drinking whiskey all year round, all kinds of whiskey. And also, have you ever heard of air conditioning and central heating and air? Because that sort of levels it all out. So what is here's the question for you in the comments. Wait, I'll ask it in a second. You already know what it is, but let's see what the water did. Ooh, the water brought out, wintergreen came out on the nose, and it darkened the vanilla even more. Oh, and it got rid of the dryness of the palate, and it gave me this sort of zesty, peppery, spicy vanilla cream and a little bit of like bitter dark chocolate for some reason. Anyway, with a dash of water, like this 30% more easily. But very cool. So here's the question for you in the comments. What is your winter whiskey? Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here. If you like watching whiskey reviews in the winter, we're crawling up on it right now. Like and subscribe.